The cameras never blink. They're the sleepless, silent witnesses to our world, perched on corners, hidden in ceilings, watching over our homes. They record everything from the boringly normal to the utterly unspeakable. For a security guard facing the long, quiet expanse of the night shift, these cameras are often their only companions. Most of the time, the silence is the worst part of the job, but not always. Sometimes, it's what you see on the monitors that follows you home and haunts your daylight hours. These aren't stories of ghosts or phantoms. The accounts you're about to hear are inspired by real events and reports from the people who watch the watchers. While we've changed names, locations, and certain details to protect everyone's privacy, the horror is very real. These are tales from security guards, homeowners, and remote observers who saw far, far too much. They're stories about what happens when security fails, and the camera is the only witness. We begin with a story that proves the most terrifying intruders don't always have to break down a door. Story 1, the stairwell phantom. For a night guard, boredom is the standard. Terror is the exception. Mark had been a security guard for nearly 20 years, and most of his shifts were spent battling boredom, not burglars. He worked in a high-end residential tower downtown, a place of polished marble and fake smiles. His post was a small, clean desk in the lobby, surrounded by a bank of monitors showing a grid of the building's sterile, silent hallways, parking garages, and the stairwells. The system was state-of-the-art, a multi-million-dollar web of digital eyes, and Mark knew its weaknesses better than the engineers who'd installed it. Every system has them. One Tuesday night, he was training a new recruit, a young kid named George who was jumpy and still saw a threat in every shadow. The trick, Mark explained, pointing at a monitor, is to know the blind spots. Take stairwell B, for example. Between the 3rd and 4th floor landing, there's a 2-second gap as a person moves around the pillar. You can see them enter the landing, and you can see them leave, but for 2 seconds, they're ghosts. As if on cue, a flicker of movement caught George's eye on that exact monitor. "What was that?" he asked, leaning forward. Mark rewound the footage. There it was, a shadow near the pillar, distorted and brief. It could have been a trick of the light. They watched for another minute. Nothing. Mark was about to dismiss it when he noticed something else. The fire door on the 2nd floor landing was propped open. Just a crack. That was a huge fire code violation, but it was more than that. It was just wrong. In 3 years at this post, Mark had never seen that door left open. He kept his eyes glued to the monitors for stairwell B. For an hour, there was absolute silence. George was starting to look bored, but Mark felt that old, familiar prickle on the back of his neck, the feeling that something was out of place. And then it happened. The feed for camera 7, the one on the 5th floor landing, went black, not static, not a frozen image, just a clean, perfect black screen, dead. "Okay," Mark said, his voice low and calm. "Someone's in there, and they know what they're doing." He explained to a wide-eyed George that to reach the spot to disconnect that specific camera's cable, you had to use the pillar on the 4th floor as cover, then scale the railing and shimmy along a narrow ledge. It required planning. This wasn't a resident taking a shortcut. Mark sent George to do a physical patrol of the main floor, with strict instructions to stay out of stairwell B. He wanted the kids safe, and he wanted to be alone with his monitors. He sat there, in the silent lobby, just watching the black square on his screen. 10 minutes passed. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the feed from camera 7 flickered back to life. The image was perfect. The stairwell was empty, clean, silent. Mark zoomed in on the lens. Earlier, he'd noticed a small smudge of dust on the housing. It was gone. The lens had been wiped clean. He called George back to the desk, his heart thudding in his chest. Had he imagined it? As they reviewed the footage from a hallway camera that had a sliver of a view of Stairwell B's top landing, George pointed. There, right there. What is that? Mark leaned in, tucked into the deepest corner of the landing. In a spot almost perfectly hidden by a concrete support beam was a shape, a huddled, blurry form. It was almost invisible, just a slight distortion in the pixel. They called the police. 2 officers went up and found a man, homeless, wrapped in a thin jacket, and fast asleep. He offered no resistance. When they questioned him, he explained, with surprising clarity, that he'd been observing the building for weeks. He had mapped the security guards' patrol routes, the timing of their rounds, and the exact location and angle of every single camera. He knew the blind spots, the briefest gaps in coverage. He had disabled the camera, wiped his fingerprints from it, and then reconnected it from his hiding spot, all for a few hours of uninterrupted, warm sleep. The officers took him away. There was no violence, no theft. But Mark never looked at his monitors the same way again. Their fortress of technology had been silently and completely defeated by one man with time and patience. The phantom of Stairwell B was gone, but he left behind a chilling truth. The feeling of being secure is often just an illusion. Story 2, The Eye in the Nursery. We think of our homes as our safest spaces, and inside our homes, no room is more sacred than a child's bedroom. But sometimes, the very tools we use to feel secure are the things that let our deepest fears in. This account comes from a nurse named Sarah, and it shows a terrifyingly common and deeply violating kind of home invasion. Sarah was an ER nurse, a job that runs on caffeine and adrenaline. One evening, she got roped into a double shift. Her husband, Tom, was on a business trip, leaving their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, at home with a teenage babysitter. Sarah was a natural worrier, and the distance felt huge. Her only comfort was the security camera app on her phone. She had cameras covering the doors and living room, but the one she checked obsessively was in Lily's room. It was their high-tech baby monitor, a little white orb on the dresser that gave her a perfect view of her sleeping daughter. Around 2 a.m, the ER was in a rare moment of calm. Sarah pulled out her phone for her nightly ritual. She opened the app. The feed for Lily's room was active, the small blue light on the camera, visible in the grainy night vision. That was odd. The babysitter knew the rules. The camera was for when Lily was awake. Once she was asleep, it was supposed to be turned off for privacy. Sarah felt a flash of irritation, figuring the sitter had just forgotten. She tapped the screen to activate the audio, expecting the soft hum of the sound machine. At first, that's all she heard, along with Lily's gentle breathing. Sarah was about to close the app when another sound filtered through her phone. A voice. It was low and guttural, distorted by the digital compression. A whisper. "Don't be scared, Lily," the voice rasped. "Santa just wants to be your friend. Santa knows you've been a good girl." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She sat straight up in the deserted break room, the phone shaking in her hand. On the screen, she saw Lily stir in her sleep. The voice continued, a horrific, predatory coo. "I have so many toys for you, Lily Pad. I know you love dolls. I will bring you all the dolls. Lily Pad." That was her husband's special nickname for their daughter. This person knew her name, her nickname. Panic seized her. She fumbled to call the babysitter's cell. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. She tried the house landline. No answer. She was miles away, trapped in a hospital, watching a live broadcast of a monster whispering to her child. The blue light on the camera seemed to mock her. Then, in a surge of desperate fury, Sarah remembered the two-way talk feature. She pressed the microphone icon and screamed into her phone, her voice raw. "Get away from my daughter, you sick freak." For a moment, silence. Then, a sound that would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. A laugh, a grotesque digital chuckle, warped and inhuman. Too late. The voice crackled, and the feed went dead. Sarah's scream echoed through the empty ER. She dialed 911, her words a tangle of terror and rage. The minutes that followed were the longest of her life. Finally, her phone rang. It was a police officer. They were inside. The babysitter had fallen asleep on the couch with her headphones in. Lily was safe, still sleeping in her bed. There was no one in the house. The investigation revealed a hacker had gained access through their router, which still had the manufacturer's default password. He hadn't just been watching. He was part of an online ring that traded live feeds from compromised home security cameras, especially baby monitors. Sarah and Tom later found clips of their daughter sleeping posted on a dark corner of the internet. They weren't the only victims. There were thousands. They tore every camera, every smart device out of their house, but the damage was done. The safest place in their world had been violated, not by a broken window, but by a password. The horror wasn't just that a stranger had watched their daughter. It was that he had spoken to her, weaving himself into her dreams. And Sarah had been forced to watch, a helpless spectator to an invasion that was silent, invisible, and 1,000 times more personal. Story 3, The Morning True. Not all security guards are on site. Many work in anonymous office buildings, hundreds or even thousands of miles away from the properties they protect. They are remote observers, their power and their helplessness all contained in the click of a mouse. This account is about the moment a guard's routine observation became a desperate race against time. Alex's world was a grid of silent, moving pictures. He worked the early morning shift, from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. at a remote monitoring station. His job was to watch over dozens of homes in a wealthy, gated community in another state. They called his shift the ghost yard because nothing ever happened. He watched sprinklers turn on, newspapers get delivered, and early risers leave for the gym. It was mind-numbing. At 7:45 on a crisp autumn morning, an alert chimed. Motion detected in the driveway of Islam 278 Elm Street. Alex clicked, pulling up the live feed. It showed 2 teenage girls, probably sisters, leaving the house with backpacks, laughing as they walked towards the street. A perfect picture of normal suburban life. Alex was about to close the window when he saw it, a white Ford Taurus, cruising past the house at a crawl. It wasn't just the slow speed that bothered him. It was the way it continued to the end of the cul-de-sac, made a sharp U-turn, and started heading back. Alex's training kicked in. He zoomed in, trying to see the driver, but the windows were tinted. He switched to the street view camera. The car pulled to a stop directly in front of the house, brake lights still on. His heart started pounding. The car doors flew open. 4 men, in hoodies and masks, burst out. Their movements weren't casual. They were aggressive and fast. Alex watched. his breath caught in his throat as they sprinted up the driveway toward the two girls. The girls saw them at the last second. Their laughter died, replaced by confusion, then terror. One of the men grabbed the older girl by her arm, trying to drag her back towards the open front door. The other men tried to corral the younger sister. The girls were screaming now, fighting back with a ferocity that surprised Alex, dropping their backpacks, kicking, creating a scene. Alex's hands flew across his console. He slammed the large red panic button for 1128 Elm Street. Instantly, a deafening alarm blared from the house's external speakers, and the system automatically dialed 911, feeding the dispatcher the address and a computer-generated voice, "Home invasion in progress," verified by live video. But that wasn't enough. The men were still there, stunned by the alarm, but still wrestling with the girls. Alex hit the button for the two-way audio. He leaned into his microphone, his voice booming out of the very camera that was recording the assault. "Police have been dispatched," he yelled, his voice shaking but loud. "Your faces and vehicle are recorded. Leave the property immediately." The effect was instantaneous. The men froze. They looked up, bewildered, searching for the disembodied voice. One of them spotted the dark dome of the camera above the garage. Panic flashed across his eyes. He yelled something to the others, and they let go of the girls. They turned and sprinted back to the car, tires screeching as they tore down the street. Through his headset, Alex could hear the faint, but rapidly growing, wail of sirens. The police arrived less than a minute later to find the two girls huddled together on the lawn, terrified but physically okay. Alex spent the next hour on the phone with the lead officer, downloading the footage and giving his statement. His supervisor called him a hero. The family sent a letter thanking him for saving their daughters, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling of absolute dread. For 30 seconds, he had been nothing but a spectator, watching from 1,000 miles away as two children were nearly dragged back into their own home. He had done his job, and it worked. But he still has nightmares about the footage, the silent, frantic struggle, the look of pure terror on the girls' faces. He wonders what would have happened if he'd looked away for just one more second. Story 4: The Barefoot Woman. There's a unique and terrible helplessness that comes with watching your own home be violated from afar. You're a ghost in your own house, able to see and hear, but utterly powerless to do anything. This story was shared by a man named David, and it's about what he witnessed on his phone. In a lonely hotel room, an entire continent away from his family. David was on a business trip in Seattle, while his wife, Jessica, and their young son were at home in Texas. It was late, almost midnight, before bed. He went through his nightly ritual, opening his home security app. It gave him a sense of connection, of control. He watched the familiar feeds. He saw Jessica in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, locking the back door. He smiled, feeling a pang of homesickness. He was about to close the app when his phone buzzed violently. A motion alert. Backyard camera. His heart leapt into his throat. He tapped the notification. The feed loaded, showing his back patio, eerily lit by the security light. And standing there, by the glass patio door, was a figure, a woman. She was wearing a flimsy, white nightgown, like something from another era. Her hair was matted and wild. Her feet were bare. She was standing perfectly, unnaturally still, just staring at the door. David's mind raced. He immediately tried calling Jessica's cell. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She must have put it on the charger in their bedroom. He watched his screen, his knuckles white. The barefoot woman took a step forward and tried the handle of the patio door, locked. For a moment, David felt a wave of relief. It didn't last. The woman looked around the patio, her movements jerky and unpredictable. She picked up a large river stone from next to Jessica's potted plants. No, 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 David whispered to the empty hotel room. He watched in horror as the woman raised the rock high and brought it down against the glass. The sound didn't travel through the video, but he saw the spiderweb of cracks appear. Then the entire pane of glass collapsing inwards. The woman stepped through the jagged opening into his kitchen. She was inside. David's hands were trembling so badly he could barely use his phone. He remembered the app had a siren feature. He found the icon and slammed his thumb on it. A piercing, deafening siren immediately began blaring from the camera's speaker in his kitchen, thousands of miles away. On the screen, he saw Jessica run into the kitchen, her face a mask of confusion. She saw the shattered door, and then she saw the intruder. The barefoot woman turned to face her, and that's when David saw something glinting in the intruder's hand. She had grabbed a pair of scissors from the knife block on the counter. What happened next was a chaotic blur. The woman lunged at Jessica, scissors raised. David could only watch this silent, terrible dance on his tiny screen. He was already on the phone with the 911 dispatcher in his hometown, shouting, trying to explain that he was watching his wife being attacked live on his phone. The living room camera captured the struggle as it spilled out of the kitchen. He could hear the app's siren, the muffled sounds of the fight, and Jessica's terrified screams, all tinny and distant through his phone. He was shouting her name, as if she could hear him. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights swept across the living room wall. The police were there. Officers burst through the front door and subdued the intruder, a frantic, incoherent woman who had walked away from a nearby psychiatric facility. Jessica was on the floor, bleeding from cuts on her arms and hands, but she was alive. David stayed on the line until he knew she was safe. He hung up and sat on the edge of his hotel bed, the app still open, now showing paramedics attending to his wife. He had done everything right. He had called for help. He had saved her, but he had also been the sole audience member for the most terrifying show hour of his life. The image of the barefoot woman raising the scissors, the sound of his wife's screams mixed with the digital wail of the alarm. They are fragments of a nightmare he can never unsee. Story 5, The Watcher in the Woods. Some security jobs are different. They involve protecting not just people, but secrets. They're set in remote, isolated locations where the silence is vast and the darkness is absolute. This story comes from a former guard named Chloe, who worked at a facility so remote. The biggest threat was supposed to be the wildlife. She soon learned that the woods can hold much older and more intelligent predators. Chloe's post was the stuff of security legend. She was a remote monitor for the private estate of a reclusive tech billionaire. The property was more of a compound than a house, nestled in hundreds of acres of dense, untouched forest in the Pacific Northwest. Her job was to sit in a comfortable chair in a control room 50 miles away and just watch. The system was military grade, with thermal and motion sensing cameras that could spot a field mouse from half a mile away. For the first few months, the job was exactly as advertised. She logged deer, tracked coyotes, and once watched a bear take a nap in a sunbeam. Then came the night in late October. It was around 3 a.m., the dead zone of the shift where the world seems to hold its breath. A soft chime broke the silence. A thermal camera on the far western perimeter had been triggered. Chloe pulled up the feed. The alert wasn't for an animal. The heat signature was distinct, upright, bipedal, human. It was standing perfectly still at the very edge of the tree line, a lone, warm figure in a cold, blue landscape. Just watching the main house, over a mile away. Chloe's pulse quickened. Protocol was clear. She activated the long-range acoustic device. "You are on private property," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hand. "This is a restricted area. Please leave now." The figure didn't move. It didn't even flinch. It just stood there, a pillar of heat against the cold trees. She repeated the warning, sharper this time. Still nothing. The stillness was what was so terrifying. An animal would have bolted. A lost hiker would have yelled for help. This person just watched. She called her supervisor, an ex-cop who'd seen it all. He sounded unconcerned. Probably just a local kid trying to get a peek. Log it. Don't call the police unless they cross the fence. Chloe felt a knot of dread. This didn't feel like a kid. She logged the event, but couldn't take her eyes off the screen. For 20 agonizing minutes, the figure remained motionless. A sentinel in the dark. Chloe decided to do something that wasn't exactly in the protocol. She switched from the thermal view to the corresponding high-definition night vision camera. The image took a second to resolve, shifting from a world of heat to one of grainy blacks and greens. The camera's iris adjusted, and there he was, a man, tall and slender, in dark, functional clothing. Not a kid. The camera's autofocus whirred as it locked onto his position, and as the image sharpened, the man did something that made Chloe's blood run cold. He slowly, deliberately lifted his head and looked directly into the camera lens. He wasn't looking at the house anymore. He was looking at her. He knew. He knew exactly where the camera was, hidden hundreds of feet away in a fake fir tree. His face was blank, showing no fear, no anger, no surprise. It was a look of calm, intelligent appraisal. Then, he slowly raised one hand, not in a wave, but in a small, distinct nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent, chilling message. "I see you, too." And then he turned, and with 2 steps, was swallowed by the impenetrable black of the forest. He didn't run. He just melted away. Chloe frantically switched back to the thermal camera. Nothing. The heat signature was gone. He had simply vanished. A physical patrol was dispatched with dogs. They found nothing. No tracks. No broken twigs. Not a single thing out of place. It was as if he had never been there at all. The incident was filed as an anomaly. The billionaire owner was never even told. But Chloe couldn't shake the image of that nod. It wasn't the gesture of a trespasser who'd been caught. It was the gesture of a peer, a fellow observer. She quit a month later, haunted by the question of who was watching from the woods and what they knew. She'd been hired to be the eyes in the dark, never imagining that something in the dark might be looking right back. Story 6, The Inside Man. Every high-security facility, every fortress of commerce has one great, glaring weakness: the people who are allowed to be there. The most dangerous threats don't always break in. Sometimes they walk right through the front door, wave at the camera, and punch a time clock. This story, adapted from a loss prevention specialist's case file, is a stark reminder that the call is often coming from inside the house. Frank's job was a modern form of archaeology. As a corporate loss prevention specialist, He spent his days digging through mountains of recorded footage, searching for the ghosts of stolen merchandise. His current dig site was a massive distribution warehouse, a building the size of a city that shipped millions of dollars in electronics every day. For the past 6 months, the warehouse had been bleeding. High-end laptops, new gaming consoles, and expensive smartwatches were vanishing from the night shift inventory. They called it shrinkage. Frank called it a multi-million-dollar theft ring. His target was a quiet corner of the warehouse, aisle 17, where the high-value items were caged before being loaded onto trucks. He started scrubbing through weeks, then months of overnight footage. The work was brutal on the eyes, a hypnotic blur of forklifts and boxes. But then he found the pattern. It was subtle, but it was there. Every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, at precisely 3:15 a.m., the feed from camera 12B, the main camera covering the high-value cage, would go dead. It wouldn't show static. The time code on the recording would just jump. It would be 3:14:59, and the next frame would be 3:30 and 15 minutes. Wiped clean. Frank felt that jolt of adrenaline. This was it. He pulled up the feeds from the adjacent cameras, which had partial obstructed views of aisle 17, and synced them to 3:14 a.m. on the most recent Tuesday. He watched, holding his breath. At 3:14:30, a forklift operator he recognized as Kevin came into view. Kevin was a 10-year veteran of the night shift, a trusted employee known for his corny jokes. Kevin parked his forklift just out of the main walkway, directly under camera 12B. Then he did something truly bizarre. He looked straight up into the lens of the doomed camera with a wide, theatrical grin. And he waved, a big, slow, deliberate wave. He then reached into his jacket, pulled out a small bag of potato chips, and began casually eating them, still staring up at the camera, looking like a man waiting for a bus. At exactly 3:15 hours, the main feed from 12B cut out on Frank's monitor, just as he knew it would. But on the side cameras, Frank saw Kevin spring into action. His board act vanished. He produced a key card, opened the high-value cage, and began loading specific boxes onto a pallet he'd hidden behind some empty crates. His movements were efficient and practiced. What was truly chilling was that Kevin never touched the camera. He just stood under it, working with the calm assurance of a man who knew he was invisible. Frank realized, with a jolt, that Kevin wasn't the one disabling the camera. He had a partner, someone with system access in IT, or maybe even another security monitor, killing the feed from a remote terminal right on schedule. The wave wasn't just arrogance, it was a signal. I'm in position, cut the lights. At 3:29 a.m., Kevin loaded the last box, closed the cage, and gave a final, jaunty thumbs up to the dead camera lens. He hopped on his forklift and drove away. At 3:30, right on the dot, the feed from camera 12B came back to life, showing an empty, silent aisle, as if nothing had ever happened. Armed with the side camera footage, the company confronted Kevin and his accomplice, an IT tech on the same shift. The shrinkage problem was a meticulously planned operation that had netted them over $1 million. They were fired and arrested, but for Frank, the case left a bitter taste. It was the casual nature of it all, the smile, the potato chips, and most of all, that arrogant, chilling wave into the camera. It was a gesture that said, "We know you're watching, and it doesn't matter." Story 7, The Helpless Observer. Perhaps the purest form of security camera horror is that of the remote observer, the guard separated from the events by an ocean of distance, connected only by a thread of technology. Their only job is to watch and to make a phone call that may or may not come in time. This final story is about one such guard and the homeowner who was forced to watch alongside him in a moment of shared utter helplessness. Marcus worked in a sterile, air-conditioned room that could have been anywhere. In reality, it was a command center in Mumbai, India. His job was to be the digital guardian for ultra-high net worth clients in the United States. Right now, he was watching the Hayes residence, a palatial home in a wealthy California suburb. For the Hayes family, it was 4 a.m., the deepest part of the night. For Marcus, it was late afternoon. He was watching their quiet, sleeping house 8,000 miles away. A soft alarm chimed, and a window popped up. Sensor tripped downstairs. Den window, Marcus's training took over. He pulled up the live feed for that room. The image made his stomach clench. The window was shattered, glass glittering on the dark floor. Two figures, masked and in black, were climbing by inside. Marcus's fingers moved with practiced speed. One click to call the local police, transmitting the address, an intrusion alert. A second click to dial the primary client, Mr. Hayes. The protocol was absolute. Call the police, then call the client. The dispatcher confirmed a car was en route, but the ETA was 7 minutes. In a home invasion, 7 minutes is an eternity. Mr. Hayes answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Hello, Mr. Hayes. This is Marcus from Omni Global Security, Marcus said, his own voice a model of forced calm. Sir, I am alerting you that there is a break-in currently in progress at your residence. The police have been dispatched. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then, raw panic. What, oh my God? My wife, my kids, are they okay? Marcus pulled up the master feed, a mosaic of all the interior cameras. The intruders are downstairs, sir. Your family appears to be safe and asleep upstairs. Then, he had to do the hardest part of his job, narrate the nightmare to the man who owned the home. Sir, they are moving through the den. They are armed with crowbars. They are now approaching the main staircase. He could hear Mr. Hayes' ragged breathing over the phone. I have the app, Mr. Hayes suddenly said. I'm opening the app. And just like that, they were watching together, two men on opposite sides of the planet, their eyes fixed on the same grainy images. They watched the two masked figures creep up the stairs. They reached the upstairs landing. The layout on Marcus's screen showed that the door directly in front of them was the master bedroom, where Mrs. Hayes and the children were sleeping. One of the intruders put his ear to the door. The other raised his crowbar slightly. Marcus could hear a choked sob from Mr. Hayes over the phone. They're going to go in, Marcus whispered, as much to himself as to his client. His own heart was hammering his ribs. He was just a voice, an eye in the sky. He could do nothing more. The intruder reached for the doorknob. He began to turn it, slowly, silently. At that exact, heart-stopping moment, the entire landing was washed in strobing red and blue light. The lights from the arriving police car, an ocean of miles and an eternity of minutes away, were flooding through the large window at the front of the house. The effect was immediate. The intruders froze, their heads snapping towards the light. They exchanged a look of pure panic, turned, and scrambled back down the stairs, tripping over each other to escape. The police caught one of them in the backyard. The Hayes family, miraculously, slept through the whole thing, only to be woken by police clearing the house. They were safe. But Marcus stayed on the line for another 10 minutes, listening to Mr. Hayes weep with a mixture of relief and terror. He described the absolute, soul-crushing powerlessness of watching that doorknob turn from a hotel room in Tokyo. After the call, Marcus leaned back, the adrenaline leaving him shaky and cold. His job was to be the witness. He saw everything and touched nothing. He was the helpless observer, forever bound to other people's worst moments by a fragile, invisible thread. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the memory of that turning doorknob would stay with both him and Mr. Hayes for the rest of their lives. The silent eye of the camera captures the truth of the night. It sees the things that hide in the shadows, and the things we pretend aren't there. Have you ever seen something on a security camera that you couldn't explain, or have a true, terrifying story from a night shift you've worked? Share your own story in the comments below. We read all of them. And if these stories sent a chill down your spine, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror taken from the dark corners of the world. Remember to lock your doors and maybe check your passwords. You never truly know who might be watching. Stay safe and try to sleep well.